Kentucky continues to be one of the toughest teams to beat in college football, and not necessarily because they're at the top of their conference or one of the best teams in the sport, but it's just a tough team to beat. They play really well for each other. Mark Stoops has put together a great culture, and we're going to dive deep into what makes them so good and what we should look forward to in 2024. Before we do that, though, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video. That goes a long way in helping this channel thrive and helps this series thrive as well. So make sure you're doing all that. Subscribe, like, and share the video. And let's dive into the Kentucky Wildcats. We'd start with obviously Mark Stoops. Mark Stoops has done an incredible job at Kentucky, just continues to win, has one of the best contracts in college football. If you don't know about that, I recommend checking that out. He's just a good coach who knows how to bring in the right kind of talent to compete in a tough conference. To be able to do what he's doing in the SEC says a lot about his abilities to coach. He's done a good job of bringing in the right coordinators for the job. And even when they've had certain guys, Liam Cohen was the most recent one, move on to the NFL, you've seen him bring in solid coordinators. And now everybody's looking at what Bush Hadman can do for this offense. This shouldn't be too much of a different offensive look. You can still expect this group to want to run the football and be very physical at the line of scrimmage. You're just hoping that the passing attack can take a step forward, especially with the talent that we'll talk about today. Brad White, one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. He's going to have a solid defense once again. Maybe a group that takes a step forward from last year. It was not a bad group last year by any means, but there's definitely room for improvement. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on there. Now, when you're looking at the transfer portal and what Kentucky brought in, there are a number of players that are going to contribute right away or be part of the rotation, which is really exciting. The quarterback position is probably the one that everyone's paying attention to. You brought in three transfer portal quarterbacks. I think maybe there is a little bit of a concern in terms of what does that mean for consistency and in terms of chemistry, that kind of stuff. But a lot of people are excited about what Brock Vandagriff brings to the table. Vandagriff's a former Georgia transfer that is set to take over this Kentucky offense, and he will have a ton of talent. This is a staff that focused primarily on the offensive side of the ball through the transfer portal, and quarterback was one of them. They also bring in Gavin Wimsatt from Rutgers. They also bring back Bo Allen, so there's definitely some talent to utilize, a little bit different skill set with those three, but Vandergriff is where everyone's going to be watching because he is someone who is expected to take another step in terms of being now he's a starter, being a backup at Georgia. You expect big things from him. You also get a huge transfer in Chip Trainum, the former Arizona State and Ohio State transfer, who played linebacker for the Buckeyes, but then was used in running back situations because of a lack of depth, injuries, that kind of stuff. He is now a full-time running back, and that's what he was at Arizona State. I am really excited to see what he can do in this offense as well. Another big one was getting Jamon Dumas Johnson from Georgia. That was kind of a surprise. When it comes to Georgia, I don't think things are too much of a surprise with the amount of talent that they have. But seeing Jamon Dumas Johnson, who was a solid starter for them, going to the transfer portal was, I think it speaks to what Georgia thinks they have. But I also think that that means a new opportunity for a team like Kentucky, and they're going to have a good duo at linebacker. We'll dive more into that there. And they just brought in, I think, just pieces that are gonna, I don't want to say plug and play, but they're going to be major contributors. Jamari Macklin's going to be one of those guys. Jalen Farmer and Daryl Mincy are going to do that on the offensive line as well. Christian Story is going to play a role in the defensive backfield. So there's plenty of guys that you bring in that are automatically going to make an impact, instant impact players. That's exactly what you need for this team because you're losing a couple of players that will make some depth concerns, but also you're looking at a team that is still good even without some of these guys. Now, I would say they didn't lose a ton in the transfer portal in terms of you took any big hits. You lost a couple guys. Keaton Wade, I think, was a bigger loss for them, but I still think that this is a good group despite those losses. So there's not too many concerns in the transfer portal. So that's really good. If you're a Kentucky fan, that eases some of your concerns potentially for 2024. And again, props to the staff for doing such a great job because they brought in the right guys. They know exactly what they needed. And now they're going to look forward to what should be another successful season. And again, all that starts with Brock Vandagriff. The quarterback position is going to be vital to this team. And that's not really a surprise. We saw that with Devin Leary. We knew that that was what was needed. Same with Will Levis. You know, the quarterback has to play an efficient role, and Vandagriff is going to be the guy now. 6'3", 210 pounds, comes in from Georgia. Didn't have a ton of production because he was, in a backup role in a crowded quarterback room with you had Carson Beck and you've had Gunnar Stockton on top of the number of big time recruits that you're going to bring in if you're Georgia. It was just time for him to move on, and Kentucky benefits from that. I'm really excited to see what he can do. I think he's a very talented quarterback, has a good arm, can distribute the ball to his playmakers. And again, the playmakers that he has are really exciting. When you look at Demi and Chip in the backfield with him, you're having a two good running backs that are set to have a big year. Ray Davis obviously did some really good things for this program, and now it's time for them to move on. And you have two running backs that are eager to show what they can do. Both of them are transfers. Demi's coming in from NC State 2 years ago, and Chip's coming in from Ohio State. So I think this is a good duo that will be really fun to watch. And there's also solid depth to me in terms of not quantity, but quality. Jason Patterson is a true freshman who emerged in the spring as a potential rotational guy. When they need someone to step up, he might be that guy. He's going to be someone that will figure into the rotation, and that's huge, especially if you can get a freshman in the SEC to play. We're seeing that more and more now, but it's still impressive if you are ready to go that early in your career. And the rushing attack will be a key factor for this offense. They need to get back to running the football more efficiently after they finished 97th in rushing last year. So that's definitely not what this staff wants. Mark Stoops needs this group to be better and more efficient, moving the ball down the field on the ground because the offense, the passing attack will need a little bit of time to gel, especially early in the season. Vandagriff is obviously very talented, but you're going to need time to get used to the guys that you're throwing to. You'll get used to that in practice, playing against air, playing against your own team, but it's different when there's another team lined up against you. So the rushing attack needs to be good, and I feel pretty good about where that group is headed. The passing attack is, like I said, a very important, I won't call it an X factor, but definitely a big component of how successful this team can be. When you look at the talent they have, though, there's no reason why you should be concerned. There's plenty of reasons to be excited, and there's a lot of talent for Vandergrift to utilize. Brian Brown's an absolute speedster that can make big plays, can be explosive. At 539 yards and 4 touchdowns, also will be a dangerous threat as a returner. So he is someone that can be explosive. Dane Key's been doing this for a while as well, averaged 15 yards per catch. So he is someone that is, again, fits into that category of can be a game changer. If you can get him the football and find ways to get them out in space and let their speed do the rest, then you're in good hands. He had 636 yards and 6 touchdowns. Another explosive weapon they bring in from North Texas is Jamori Macklin. Had over 1,000 yards last year on just 57 catches. That's 17.6 yards per catch and 11 touchdowns. Now, playing in the AAC versus playing in the SEC is a little bit of a step. But if he can find a way to settle in, especially knowing he has Brown and Key around him, then you're looking at a group that should be really fun to watch. And Macklin shouldn't have too much trouble adapting to those circumstances. Tight end Jordan Dingle is another player to keep an eye on. Another explosive weapon, fits more kind of towards that Y role in as the tight end position. So more of that receiving, that pass catching tight end than anything, but still someone that's going to have to be a factor blocking for the run as well. So this is an offense that has tons of potential. I think that this starting group for the passing attack is set to have a big year. They just got to get that chemistry, like I said, with Vandergriff, because if they do, they're going to be really terrorizing on opposing secondaries. Now, behind them is where you probably have a little bit more questions. So Anthony Brown Stevens only had 44 yards last year, but the staff really likes him. Freshman Hardly Gilmore is going to be a factor as well. He emerged pretty quickly for this group. And again, this is another guy that the staff really likes what he can do. And then there's some depth at the tight end position. And when you look at Josh Caddis and Kumari Anderson, those are two guys that could step up and play bigger roles. If Dingle is needing a break or whatever it might be, they have some solid depth there. So the passing attack to me shouldn't be too concerning. If anything, you're looking at a group that is just ready to prove that it's not as underrated as everyone's making it out to be. And that'll be really fun if Kentucky's offense finds that balance, if they're able to be explosive through the air, then teams are not going to like facing them. Kentucky's already tough to beat as is. If you add an element where they can take a step forward and be even more terrorizing, then you're looking at a group that is very, very, very tough to stop. The offensive line obviously plays a big role with that as well. And we talked about a couple of these guys earlier with Jalen Farmer and Gerald Mincy. These are two guys that will potentially play big roles in this offensive line. Farmer's a little bit more inexperienced than Mincy is, coming from Florida. Mincy's coming from Tennessee, but they're still very talented players that will help a group that on the other side is very experienced. Marquez Cox has 62 games somehow of experience, and somehow he is back. He is going to be a leader for this offensive line. Jacob Burton is another one, a less experienced, but still has 25 starts. So that's plenty of experience there. And then center Eli Cox is another one that will be able to help these guys get up to speed, because it might take some time to learn the system. It might take some time to learn where your teammates are going, how they handle certain stunts, how they handle certain blitzes, and you have some experience to help them out in case something happens there. Dylan Ray is another guy that could factor in with Jalen Farmer at guard, could also spell Burton if he needs it. Has 10 starts under his belt, so he's someone to keep an eye on there. Portland Ford at tackle, same thing there. His experience, he's a talented player. It's just a matter of who's going to be that reliable player for the tackle position. Malachi Wood, a redshirt freshman, could also play a role in that group as well. So it should be a fun group to watch, regardless of who's going to be in that rotation. And maybe you see a handful of guys fill in there. So there's a few players to keep an eye on in terms of experience, mostly the left tackle, left guard, and center positions. And then the right guard and the right tackle are probably the bigger questions. Now, obviously, an injury could make that all different. Maybe someone goes down and you need someone to step up at that left tackle position, at that center position. So something that to keep an eye on. You just never know, especially in college football. Everything is you need to prepare for it in terms of adversity. Some injuries could happen that you're not anticipating. That's obviously going to be difficult, but you have the right guys in place. You have depth. That's going to be really fun to watch. Another factor of this to help the offensive line, you're facing a defensive line that has a lot of exciting players and guys that are going to be playing at the next level. So that makes this offensive line better. It's going to make them a more talented group because they have to face tougher competition. This defensive line features the two players we'll talk about first are JJ Weaver and Deion Walker. Deion Walker, who recently said he plans to run a 4.6. He thinks that he can run a 4.6 in the 40 at his weight is just insane. The fact that he is that big and can move that fast is almost unfair. Like, he is an absolute beast. 12 and a half tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks at a defensive tackle position, a position that doesn't usually get a ton of, it doesn't fill up the box score. So he is someone who is an all-American type player, someone who's going to be an absolute beast for Kentucky, and he's going to help guys around him. Same with JJ Weaver. JJ Weaver is a great edge player for this defense. He is someone that can open things up and command more attention, and that's nice, because if you put those two on the same side, you're kind of putting a lot of pressure on guys like Keyshawn Silver and Octavius Oxendine. You're looking at them to make plays, but at the same time, you know that you're going to get easier matchups. You know those two guys won't have extra attention sent their way because Deion Walker's most likely getting double teamed every single play. They just can't, teams just can't afford. There's only certain teams that can afford to put one guy on. Georgia's probably one of the few teams that can do that. But you're not facing Georgia every week. You're not facing those types of teams that can handle Deion Walker with one guy. So that opens things up for the teammates around him. JJ Weaver's kind of the same thing. Now you can't afford to send too much help because if you send too much help to help two guys, you still have for as good as these two players are, Silver and Oxendine are going to be two guys that are SEC talented players. So you're gonna get plenty of production if teams aren't careful because they can play. They have proven that they are ready to handle this challenge. I mean, Oxendine had 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Bijan Silver's a little bit greener in terms of the production, but still someone who is going to be a factor if you aren't careful. So this defensive line is really exciting. And then when you look at the depth is really exciting if you're Kentucky because you have a lot of exciting nonsense behind these guys. Now, if Weaver and Walker need a break, which hopefully doesn't happen as much as you might think, but if it does, you have experience behind them. Trayvon Uribka is a guy with five tackles for loss. Josiah Hayes at tackle, nose tackle, 4.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Khalil Saunders, 3.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. So you have guys that are going to factor in and be part of that solution. Silver and Hayes will probably actually be in a rotation together, co-starters, if you will. Another guy to keep an eye on is freshman Gerard Smith. Again, a couple freshmen that are going to stand out for Kentucky, and that's really exciting if you're a Wildcats fan, because you know that the future of this program is pretty bright, despite what you might lose. You're going to obviously lose Weaver and Walker to the NFL after this year, but you have some exciting players behind them that could be the future of this program. So that's really exciting. Now, with this defensive line, you probably don't need great linebackers to get good production, but this is a solid duo at linebacker. Javon Dumas Johnson, De'Aaron Jackson, they are going to be two of the more exciting linebackers to watch, partially because they're going to have a lot of easier reads with Weaver and Walker doing what they do up front, but also because of their talent levels. When you look at Jackson had 89 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and Jamon Dumas Johnson, despite a down year, 34 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. So you're looking at a group of linebackers that as starters are going to be really fun to watch. So you have good experience up front, you have good experience behind them, and that's going to make this defense really good. Throw in that Brad White is one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. You're going to be in good hands. You shouldn't have too much to worry about with this group. Behind them is really fun because a guy like Tyrese February could be a factor on the edge, could be a factor at linebacker. That'll be really fun to see how they utilize his skill set, probably more on the edge than anything there. Then you have Darren Brainer, a guy with some experience coming in from last year, and then redshirt freshman Grant Godfrey. Their staff really likes what they see in him. They think he has a bright future after making a switch to linebacker. So he is someone to keep an eye on for the future there. And he can learn from Jackson and Dumas Johnson on how to play the position, the nuances, the intricacies of how to play that role, how to play linebacker. And you'll see him get time this year. He won't just play in cleanup time. They will factor him in, especially later in the season when he gets more comfortable. So that's a really exciting development for this team. When you look at the secondary, I feel like Kentucky's secondary is just full of sleepers, and it's guys that don't get a ton of attention. Again, Kentucky's kind of like that sleeper team, forever sleeper team, because despite the success they have the year before, they're always put lower than they probably should be. And the secondary kind of embodies that. Maxwell Hairston is a stud for this defense. Had a big year last year with 5 interceptions, and he is someone that continues to be slept on. Now, maybe not as much as these other guys here. So the other safety positions will be probably the big one. And when you look at Jansen Dunn, a player who is kind of coming into a new role and is going to learn his position kind of on the fly at times, but teams are going to try to avoid Hairston a little bit more than they did last year. Now, they're still definitely going to test him because, again, it's the SEC. The SEC, every team thinks that they're capable of moving the ball down the field and not necessarily have to worry about what can their wide receiver do or if that cornerback is going to be too good for them to throw at. So Hairston's still going to get tested, but Dunn is going to get tested a lot more, especially early on. Teams are going to say, what are you made of? Are you capable of handling our receivers? And they're going to test him a lot. So that's something to keep an eye on there. Outside of him, though, there's plenty of experience, and there will be guys that factor in too. So a guy like JQ Hardaway could be in this rotation more than I realize, but and you'll see these guys get plenty of time. No one's probably replacing Hairston, but I think that if you're looking at the even in the nickel position, Alex Safari Jr. will probably be the starter there. Dunn can also be at that nickel spot, and then if that's the case, Hardaway could go to corner. They have options. That just creates depth, which is really good. The safety position is really fun. Kind of an underrated group. Jordan Lovett had 3 interceptions last year. Zion Childress is a productive player, had 59 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. He is someone that is a veteran that knows what to expect, can get certain guys up to speed. If Dunn needs a little bit of help, he's going to have guys around him to help him out. But Dunn's not going to be brand new, but he's entering a new role, a bigger role than he did last year. Ty Bryant and Christian Story will be backups at the safety position. So there's great depth for this secondary. I like what this group has, and I really like what I'm seeing from Kentucky defensively. This will be a very tough group to beat. Again, we talked about that at the beginning of the video. This is going to be a tough team. This is going to be one of those teams that you just don't like facing. Even the really good teams in the SEC are going to have to bring their best to beat Kentucky because Kentucky can hang out and compete with a lot of these teams. If you're looking at talent level, you can do a lot worse than Kentucky. This is not your typical sleeper team where you have a lot of concerns, but there are some concerns that we will talk about. The strengths and concerns of this team are fairly obvious. Defensive line, I could just put defensive line and leave it there. I think that the linebacker position could be considered a strength as well, just not as much as the defensive line. The wide receiver starters, if they can put it all together, I mean, talent level, they're a strength of this team. You just have to find chemistry with Vandergriff and find a way to put that potential into production. To me, the running back position, not as much of a strength, but you probably could go with that as being a strength. But again, it's one of those, is it potential or is it production? So the linebacker position is probably what you would put there. You could also argue the secondary is in that as well. The whole defense probably deserves to be in that group as well. So you're looking at multiple strengths on that defensive side of the ball. Concerns to me, quarterback depth. Wimsat and Allen, if they have to go to those two, that's probably where you see a drop off the most. So you need Vandergrift to stay healthy. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they have some packages with what we've seen in the past with certain players, but I think that Vandergrift needs to stay healthy if they want to be want to be a contender or at least continue to be that tough team to beat. Wide receiver depth is going to be another concern. I think that's probably the two biggest concerns if you're looking at what worries you if you are a Kentucky fan. That's probably the biggest thing for this team is that you don't have a ton of depth at a couple positions. And then I think along with wide receivers, the starters are a strength, but if they don't find that chemistry with Vandergriff, then that's where things could get a little bit rough. And Vandergriff is the X factor, not only from a talent standpoint, from a health standpoint. If he stays healthy, I really like where this team can go. If he is struggling to do so, then maybe you're seeing a little bit of a different tune from this offense. The schedule is the SEC schedule. It's just there are certain things that are going to be tougher, and I think this is a pretty tough schedule for Kentucky. But again, like we talked about at the beginning of the video, this is a team that you just can't count out. It doesn't matter how tough this schedule is, but 6.5 wins feels like it should be attainable. I think that Vegas had a good number there, but I think that this is a team that could get above that. The ceiling to me with this schedule is 9-3. Floor is 5-7. Again, that's just speaking to the consistency of Mark Stoops. 5-7 would be like everything falls off the tracks. So that would be a little bit tougher to see, but this is definitely a group that's capable of reaching that ceiling more often than the floor. Southern Miss should be a win. Don't really have concerns about that. So we're not going to dive into that too much. South Carolina, depending on what the Gamecocks look like early in the season, that is going to be a tougher game. Now, the one thing that I will say is Kentucky feels like it's in a better spot than South Carolina is. So that one should also be a win, especially with it being at home. You then also host Georgia. I want to give Kentucky more credit in their potential ability to beat a team like Georgia. I just can't get to that point where they're on that same level. Georgia is just so good, and I think Georgia is going to be a really tough team to beat. That's a reason why they're considered one of the best, if not the best team, according to many outlets this year. They're just so good. So at best, you're going to be 2-1. That's just how it is. Then you host Ohio. Ohio should be much worse than they were last year with the amount of talent that they lost. So 3-1 isn't bad heading into a trip to Oxford to play Ole Miss. We will find out pretty quick if Ole Miss is the real deal, especially when they play Kentucky here on September 28th. If they're the real deal, Ole Miss will win that game. If they're not, Kentucky is definitely capable of hitting them in the mouth and taking care of business. Vanderbilt should be a win at Florida, even if it's on the road, should be a win unless somehow Billy Napier's find a way to light a fire in his program. That should be a win. Auburn's interesting. Should be a better team under Hugh Freeze, but Kentucky is, I think, a little bit more put together. So, but it's towards the end of the season, so we will see what Auburn looks like there. At Tennessee will be tough. Murray State's obviously a win. At Texas and then Louisville to finish the year. Those are two tough games. So again, like I said, I don't. You're not going to probably be at 9-3, but you can definitely expect 6-7 wins for sure. And I think that it's just a matter of a couple of those games, the Ole Miss game, the Tennessee game, the Louisville game. I don't know necessarily know if they can beat Texas. So that those are certain games are going to be more of a coin flip than anything. But this is a team that I trust in terms of fundamentals. I trust what they can do in terms of winning football games. So that's a fun team to watch. It's going to be a fun team once again. And Mark Stoops has done a great job so far, and he will continue doing a great job in 2024.